initiative and great. Thanks, Candace. Excuse me, Celeste. Welcome, everyone. Really great to have you here. And I know we'll have some more people joining us as we get into this topic, which I know we've got a lot of interest and intention around creating more focused, work and thinking about our hiring practices, thinking about our retention practices, thinking about the culture of our organizations and how we can create places where folks can truly thrive. I'm Estrella Reisinger. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of AEOE and the co-chair of Cali. And I'm really pleased to welcome you all here for this session. As we kick things off, we want to acknowledge that this virtual meeting is taking place throughout the unceded territory of California, home to nearly 200 tribal nations. We acknowledge and honor the ancestral grounds of these communities and support the stewardship of these lands and waters according to local indigenous wisdom and practice. I am joining from Uchin, currently known as Oakland, California, and I sit on stolen land that has been cared for by Lishan Alone since time immemorial. It would be wonderful to know where you are coming from, what organizations you're representing, where in the state are you joining us from, and please join us in sharing our appreciation for the past and present stewardship of the places we live, work, and play, and commit to shaping a future that is just. If you would like to introduce yourself in the chat, please do so. You can share what you're comfortable sharing. If you want to share your organization, if you want to share where you're joining from and whose lands you're on, it would be great to see what kind of representation we have across our amazing community. We're going to kick things off with just a little bit of a high-level overview of our two co-hosts. So I'm here representing AEOE. And for those of you who are new to our work, we were founded in 1954 by a group of outdoor educators, making us one of the first professional associations of our kind in the nation. We work to strengthen environmental education in California by connecting providers, building professional expertise, and championing environmental literacy and outdoor learning. We are a network of dedicated individuals and organizations that are committed to using environmental and outdoor education as a tool to create lasting environmental change. And we are guided by the work of our members, EE providers, practitioners, and environmental champions across the state. We also serve as the state affiliate of the North American Association for Environmental Education, representing California in the largest community of environmental educators in the world. And this webinar series is a collaboration between AEOE and the California Environmental Literacy Initiative, which is a collective action network that seeks to ensure access to high-quality environment-based learning for all of California's TK through 12 students. Led by 10 strands, Cali works statewide with guidance from members to create systems change in support of ensuring that all students have access to high-quality environment-based learning. The members of this collective network include a wide array of expertise and contributions from educators, governmental and non-governmental agencies, scientists, sustainability professionals, and individuals with expertise on the environment and systems change. And our work is informed by folks who are kind of situated within these different groups. So we have innovation hubs, which bring together people who are kind of have a job alike or have a particular perspective of how to advance environmental literacy across the state. That includes the community-based partners. Many of us here are a part of this hub and have been really thinking about, what does our community need to thrive? We work in partnership with folks from the County Office of Education and districts around the state as well. Then there are different initiatives that are moving forward and led by a number of different leaders around the state, focused on different topics or different areas that we think are really critical to our success, including equity, green career education, policy and advocacy, professional learning, the partner portal, which many of us I know are a part of, and taking the green ribbon effort to scale. We meet quarterly with the whole network, and in between these meetings, we work on taking action through these various hubs and initiatives. And within our hub, we have a number of different goals that we're working towards, really about bringing folks together. We have a number of representatives from around the state who meet regularly to share best practices, to explore what challenges we're facing, and to think about how we can best support each other. This webinar series is one of the ways that we think we can support each other by sharing knowledge, resources, and having opportunities for us to connect. And we're so delighted to have this particular topic. We know it's been one that we've been talking about for a long time as an industry, as a sector, and we know there's so much work to do. And we're joined today by the amazing Candace Dickens Russell, who was one of the lead architects on the blueprint for environmental literacy, has been involved in the environmental outdoor education world for several decades, um, and is now the director of Friends of the LA River. So we're so pleased to be working with you today, Candace, and for you to get to spend some time with us, helping us to think about how we can strengthen our work.
Thanks so much, Estrella. I really am delighted to be here. I know my voice is a little annoying. I'm quite sick, but there was no way I was missing this. So bear with me as I gravel through this presentation with you today. So yes, I am currently, my formal title is President and CEO of Friends of the LA River, which is very gravitas, but I'm really the Executive Director of Friends of the LA River, and I love every second of it. It's environmental education. It's exactly the sort of work I've always wanted to do. My background is in sustainability and social justice. That's my formal educational background. And I've worked in the environmental education sector, as Estrella said, for decades, which I actually like saying. I know that that makes me sound old, but I like being old. So before I came to this work at Friends of the LA River, I had a couple different things I was doing. I worked for Tree People for 13 years as director of education, running environmental education programs on site. We saw 10,000 school children a year on site. And then I was the director of the County of Los Angeles Department of Public Works environmental education program called Generation Earth. Our mandate was to work with 120,000 children a year. And so on the ground, off campus, we were, my staff and I, in every single middle and high school around LA County, working with teachers, helping them do environmental education programs and projects, working with communities to build equitable green teams to do greening on school campuses, etc. So environmental justice work and community engagement work is just in my DNA. It's something I've always wanted to do and loved. I left Tree People back in 2018 because I wanted to focus more on equity. Tree People is a wonderful organization, but I wasn't doing the exact kind of work that I wanted to do. I thought I would never leave Tree People, but I surprised myself and I did. And I started my own consultancy helping environmental organizations develop equitable strategic plans, thinking about their equity strategies, thinking about how they want to show up in the world, kind of ground truthing. A lot of environmental organizations think they're doing it right. They think they've got it all. They're progressive, they're thoughtful, they're caring, and they're making some of the same mistakes that other organizations are making. And so my job was to come in and help environmental organizations build an equity strategy. It's just like other kinds of strategic planning, but it's very equity focused. And I love, 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 love that work. And the only reason I left is because Friends of the LA River, where I'd been on the board for a few years and then I was off the board for a few years, they asked me to come in, and I love that organization, so I was happy to do it. But my work still is very much centered around equity in my work at FOLAR, as we call it. And also I'm constantly advising organizations, environmental organizations, on how they can be more equitable. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But I wanted to say before we get started that when I was asked to do this, we were in a very different world. Things were very different. I was in a different place emotionally. I was very focused on my preferred candidate and getting that person elected. I was making phone calls. I was flying to Arizona. I was knocking on doors. I was doing all the things. And I was not imagining this future and this present that we find ourselves in, where frankly, DEI is under attack and equity is under attack. And I want to be really transparent about that and thoughtful about that and honest about that, because I know that that feels yucky in a lot of ways. So if we can go to the next slide, we're going to do a little bit of just sharing time around that today, because I don't want to just launch into like, here's some great strategies for how to hire people in an equitable way. We're going to do that. You're going to get your money's worth. I promise. We're going to go through all the things. But before we do that, we're going to spend some time together just talking about how has this political shift impacted your work? How is this impacting the conversations you're having? I know there are people that I have worked with that have been asked to take their pronouns out of their bios. There are people that my dear friends, my very dear friends, an epidemiologist. She works in adolescent medicine with trans youth. her entire staff is under attack. Like this is a very difficult time for a lot of people. And I want to just spend a moment thinking and talking about that. So Celeste is going to be kind enough to put us into some small group breakout groups. And we're going to just spend about 5 minutes. Just introduce yourself. Let's just talk to each other for a few minutes, and then we'll come back. And I promise to go through all the things that you can do in terms of equitable hiring and retention. So back. Thank you. I hope that was a nice moment to be able to just talk with other people who are doing similar work or who care about the same things and share a little bit about how things are going for you. We're going to go ahead and get started. If we can pull the slides up. There are lots of different ways, so many techniques. I will say there are hundreds of different techniques for equitable hiring. I'm going to share with you my favorites, the ones that I tend to highlight when I'm working with my clients, and the ones that seem to be the ones that people can most kind of sink their teeth into. So we've already talked about our current climate. We're going to talk a little bit about bias and equity and what those two things have to do with each other, because sometimes it's not always obvious. We'll take a deeper dive into bias, like different types of bias and how that shows up. Types of best practices in equitable hiring, and then resources for now. So at the end, I was asked to put together a little sheet of resources for all of you that you can kind of take away from this, that you can lean on and pull up whenever you need in the future. So that's what we'll do today. And I want to make sure that when we're talking about diversity today, that we're not focused just strictly on race. We are not, I don't, despite what's going on in the federal government, we have not yet mastered how to best serve our veterans. We've not yet mastered how to best make sure that women have equal opportunities in the workplace. We have not yet crack the nut on how to best include neurodivergent people or people with disabilities of other types. It's really about so many different identities. And so we tend to think when we hear diversity, or we tend to be told that that means Black and brown people. That is not the only things that are covered. So I want to really be clear about that before we go on. So next slide, please. So we want to talk a little bit about equity and bias. So for me, equity is very much a verb. Equity is something you do. It's something that you actually have to get up and get started and get to work and roll up your sleeves. It's about bringing balance to historically unbalanced systems. Like I said, we have not yet figured these things out, how to make sure that everyone is included. And so we have to do something about that. We have to take action in order to see that happen. Whereas bias is this prejudice in favor or against something, usually in an unfair way. And so the thing about bias that I think is really important to think about is that we all have biases. We all have blind spots. Every single person, regardless of their identities, intersectional identities, have biases of their own, and it's only our responsibility to address those. We have to identify them and address them. And I do a whole course on that. That's not this course, but there is there is a responsibility that we all take to figure out what our biases are and think about ways to address them. So that's an important part of this as well. Next slide. So this is a quote that I really like. We don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. Our focus determines our reality, to quote Qui-Gon Jinn, one of my favorite philosophers. If you know who that is, I love you. Um, it's really important to understand that where we can only see what's going on from wherever we're sitting in the theater. And that makes a big difference in our abilities to do what we saw, what we thought happened. We have different ideas about how those things took place. We have different ideas about whether or not things are being addressed in the way they should be. And that's something I think we should remember and take stock of when we're trying to think about our own biases and address them. Next slide. So when we talk about bias, I want to be clear that there are so many different ways to be biased. And so there's a variety pack you can choose from. And I want to talk about a couple of them. Confirmation bias is this idea that you tend to pay more attention to information that confirms your belief. If you have a favorite news station, or if you know people who only get their news from certain sources, that is often a confirmation bias. These are people who think the way that they think, people who believe in what they believe in, and will be an echo chamber for us. And so that's something to watch out for. Look for ways to get new information. Look for ways to question what you think you know. That's a really important part of confronting our own personal biases. Attribution bias is this idea of thinking that certain people, attributing favorable things to people that you have a bias for. Maybe you prefer working with women and you will just automatically believe that a woman is right in a particular situation. Whatever it may be, this attribution is just these favorable assessments of whatever groups that you prefer. Availability bias is defaulting to top of mind information. Often, if you talk about a preschool teacher, the first picture that comes to mind is a woman. That's top of mind. That's something that happens. I'm very grateful that my daughter had a male preschool teacher. Apologies, I'll have to pause to for coughing from time to time. But that was even I was taken aback. I was like, oh, of course, men are preschool teachers all over the world, hundreds of men preschool teachers. But when we have this top of mind, we tend to like default to that. And so being aware of that. Affinity bias is gravitating toward people who are more like ourselves. This is where in hiring we talk about the problem with fit, the fiction behind fit. Does this person fit in our group? The problem with fit is that it's often affinity bias based. It's often the same kinds of people coming in the door all the time. And when I see that happening in an organization, I know that there may be some affinity bias going on and that people have to deploy certain strategies to combat that. And we'll talk about what some of those are. I'll pause here for comments or questions about these. And for tea. Okay, let's keep going. So we're going to go through what I have to put together as best practices in equitable hiring. And these are the things that we can all do and that everyone could and should be doing. But I want to make it clear that these things are not always easy. They are going to take more time. Equitable hiring takes a lot longer than sitting down with somebody and shooting the breeze and calling it an interview and hiring them because they're a great fit, which is what so many of us like to do. So many of us prefer to have a conversational interview. We prefer to just kind of off the cuff, ask lots of follow-up questions, have more of a back and forth conversation with that person. But what we tend to not realize is that because we are all walking in the door with our biases, when someone else walks through the door for an interview, we've already made up our mind about that person in a lot of ways. We have made assumptions about that person. We've made whatever determinations about that person. And what we see happen in study after study is that we'll spend more time with people that we think fit and less time with people that we think don't. You'll spend 20 minutes with the person who reminds you of the last person who had the role, and very little time with someone that you think, oh, they're not a fit. And you won't even know you're doing it. So let's go through a couple of these. The first thing is to really think about the organization itself. Um, Having values around equity within the organization is critical. And agreeing to be led by those values is extremely important. So what are they? How do you establish those? How do you go about doing it? Okay, next one. We want to make sure that the people in leadership are the ones driving this work. So often, it's two or three middle managers crusading for equity within an organization. That's good, but it's even better when leadership is involved. When leadership has articulated the vision, and is leading the work to bring more equitable practices, whether it's more inclusive practices, more diversity, whatever it may be. It's really important to have leadership involved. I cannot stress that enough. Next slide or next button. Apologies, y'all. We want to integrate strategy equity into all the strategies and plans for the organization. We spend a lot of time in strategic planning, but we don't plan for equity in the same way. So we want to think about all of our goals and what are the equity implications of our goals within the organization. And next. We want to ensure that our audiences and the communities we serve know that we care about these things. They've heard about our values. We're showing up. How often is it? I cannot believe how often it is that an organization will say that they really care about something, but their audiences have no idea that that this isn't a priority for them. They see no evidence of it. There's nothing that points to it. So we want to make sure that we're not just speaking this language internally, but externally as well. Okay, next. So here we go with actual hiring. So I am going to provide you all with my absolute favorite hiring toolkit, which is created by the Avarna Group. The ladies who run the Avarna Group, Ava and Aparna, are dear, dear friends. I love them so much. They've been absolutely critical in my development of my work is as an equity practitioner and advisor and consultant and coach. And they're just the bee's knees, I think. And I think that they have really written the book, literally, on how to do this right. So love them, love them, love them. And so this is a lot of this is going to be taken from their guidelines, and I will be providing you with the full set at the end. So that's helpful. When we say cast the widest net possible, you will not believe how people are saying that they want to work with diverse candidates, but are actually just putting their ads in the same places they've always put them. There are so many different places to advertise roles. There are so many different affinity groups. There's Latinos Outdoors. There's groups for veterans. There's all kinds of different places to advertise jobs. And so think about that when you're sending out a job listing. Where are you sending where are you sending them? Are you casting as wide a net possible? Are you reaching different identities in that case? Next. Build relationships with people who have access to diverse candidates. Take the person who runs the student internship center down at the university closest to where you work to coffee. Take that person to coffee. Spend some time with that person. That person has access to diverse candidates. Looking at the different university campus affinity groups and talking with them, being involved in community groups that might have candidates that would be interested. There's the Black Girls Hiking, for example. Are we sending our job listings to them? Maybe they don't have a website where they're going to post it, but sending something to those folks who know diverse candidates, wherever the diversity, whatever the identities we're looking for, whatever identities we're trying to hope to cultivate in our organizations, is really important. So get to know other people and spend time with them, find out what their needs are, find out what their groups are looking for. We're going to create job listings that are welcoming and inclusive and free of language that makes certain groups feel excluded. And what we mean by this is that there are language biases in job listings that come up all the time, and all kinds of biases. So for example, English language skills, is that absolutely necessary? Does the person have to only speak English? Do they have to speak two languages, whatever the languages are? Ask yourself if that's absolutely necessary. Disability bias. Don't add requirements such as ability to lift X number of pounds unless it's actually necessary for the job. I cannot tell you how many times I've had to cross that out of a job listing because I've asked them, under what circumstances does this person need to be able to lift 50 pounds over their head? And they're like, well, we just think that that's good. That can cause for disability bias. There are all kinds of ways to do this. The document that I'm going to share with you outlines lots of different ways that these biases come up. And we want to make sure that we're putting out job listings that are free of that sort of language. Next. We want to also create job listings that focus on the minimum qualifications. And what we mean by that is that they should be succinct. We don't want to dissuade people from applying if they feel that they don't meet all the qualifications. You've probably heard that women will apply for jobs if they can check 6 out of 10 boxes, whereas women will apply for jobs only if they can meet 100% of the criteria. Don't add criteria in that case. This is creating an additional barrier for women applicants. Put in just what's required. Take out anything that's not required. We have all kinds of weird stuff in there that we put in. Must be able to work weekends. Is that do people work weekends? Well, no, not really, but that might happen once in a while. Let's be clear and succinct in the job listings that we put in. Next, be explicit about benefits that will appeal to diverse candidates. When we're talking about inclusion, we're often talking about people being able to be their whole selves at work. What that looks like is whatever your various identities are, you don't have to hide them in order to work. There are people who hide the fact that they are parents because they don't want any sort of consideration or anybody to think that because they have kids, they're not going to be as dedicated, or because they have kids, they're going to want to leave early, etc. Um, if you have benefits like that, if you have a flexible schedule, if you have let's see, elder care or some sort of stipend for childcare, whatever those various things are, add those things to your job listings. Be careful, be thoughtful, and be really, really inclusive around that, because you're going to appeal to more people that way. We want to be really clear that this is a place where you can, if you're a parent, fine. You care for an older parent of your own, that's also fine. We have flexible scheduling here. Whatever these things are that make it so that people feel as if they can be themselves and they can be included in the organization, that's extremely important.
I think Candace may have frozen for a moment. So we can take a good pause and think about what are we already doing at our work sites? Where do we feel like we've made really good progress? And within all these bullets, where do we have certain areas that we might want to grow and emphasize as we think about our hiring?
Oh, there we are. Hi. I lost everybody for a second. Okay, so last one on this page. I think this is the last one on this page. Ensure that the hiring panel has had bias training. Yes, I said hiring panel. It's cute if you want to have one person make all these decisions, but it's so much more effective to have a hiring panel. Have 3 people, 5 people. I wouldn't do more than 7 people. It's so intimidating. But 3 or 5 people, I like odd numbers, who are a part of this process, that are the people who start and finish with you. What I mean by that is that these are the people who have come together, who understand what the position is, who work together on the scorecard, the rubric, all that. We'll talk about that in a second, and who are going to be at every single interview. It is so hard to have this person interviewed by someone else. Candidate 2 is interviewed by yet another person. Candidate 3 is interviewed by yet another person, and to make a clear and fair decision. Putting together a panel of people who are going to work together from beginning to end is really key. And I have had to recuse myself from interview processes that I was really excited to participate in because I couldn't make one interview. That's the way this works. You're either in it or you're not. And that's a best practice. Now, does that mean if you can't do that, you're doing it wrong? No, these are best practices, and yes, they can be difficult, but it's really helpful if you have a clear panel that can work on this position and see all the candidates from start to finish, and make sure those people have had training in bias. That's really important. Next. Actually, I'll pause here because we just went through a bunch of things and see if there's any questions. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Blinding resumes. Oh, let's get into the controversy at this point. Let's be fun. What on earth is this? What does it mean, and why would you ever do it? Okay, so I can give you a great example. I was working with an organization. They work with ocean marine life, wonderful organization. And their complaint or their concern to me was that the exact same type of person kept coming through the door and kept being hired. It was a woman. She had this exact same background. Most of them had even gone to the exact same college and graduated from the exact same program. When that happens, we know that there's something going on. We know that there's possible some sort of affinity bias, some sort of bias going on. That is one of the situations in which I would advise blinding resumes, which is to have someone who's not on the hiring panel, usually somebody who's a pre-screener, take the resumes and redact information like age, like gender, like college that they attended to, those sorts of things, because then you're looking at more of a level playing field and you're not finding yourself hiring the same people over and over again. Blinding resumes is extremely controversial. People start wailing and gnashing their teeth when I tell them that this is a best practice. I don't think it needs to happen every time, but when you're finding yourself hiring the same people over and over again, you betcha. It's time. It's time to take some of that detail out. Okay, next one. Creating a diverse hiring panel. This is back to the panel idea. I love to have a hiring panel that is that includes multiple levels of the organization. Yes, we all want to just have like the executive team be the hiring panel, but it's so helpful. What is the gift of diversity? What is the beauty of diversity? Different perspectives, different opinions. It's really helpful to have people from lower management, middle management, upper management, as a part of the hiring panel. You'll just get a richer cross section of the organization. And I think it helps to make for diverse groups make better decisions. Everybody knows that. That's been proven time and time again.
Can I ask a question about this one, Candace?
Please.
Um, I'm wondering, do you put this as a responsibility in people's job descriptions? So it's something that they know by being part of the organization that this is expected that they're going to serve, on future hiring panels?
I don't think I've ever put it into a job description. I think that we have asked people, we've never made it a requirement. We've asked people, would you like to be a part of the team that's helping find this person? Most people are delighted to do that, not everybody, but most people are delighted to do it. And everyone understands that anyone can be called upon at any time. So it's just a kind of part of the culture have found it to be. But it's not something I've ever put into job descriptions, but that's not a bad idea. It's not a bad idea to make it part of the responsibilities.
Thanks. And then just a kind of a separate question, but around the same topic.
Other
I know
question.
sometimes that staff of color can get called into these types of situations more frequently, in particular. And I would imagine this is probably true with folks with other kind of more visible, what might be considered differences.
Mhm.
And so I wonder just what your recommendations are for teams in kind of thinking about that. How do we not overburden folks who we might kind of want the representation. We really want to make sure that we're having these
Right.
diverse perspectives on the panel without continuing to single out the same folks.
Yeah, you just have to mix it up. And that's so hard because there are certain people that you really always want on there, especially if you want to signal to people, applicants, that you have a diverse team, that you have different voices, that you have different identities on your team. But it's not fair. It's a burden. As someone who has been in far too many interviews for that exact reason in other places, it's really difficult. It can be a burden. So while we want to kind of signal that we do have these identities or we care about this or this person is a valued member of our team, we just have to spread it out, even if it means we're not going to have that person in. I tend to do the final interview with a larger group anyway. So, like getting more people in to kind of see a presentation or a short explanation or whatever we're asking the candidate to do as their final kind of screening. So they get a chance to meet more of the organization in that case anyway. Other questions? Okay, so let's talk about this rubric and score chart idea instead of subjective measurements. Um, I would actually be happy to share with you all kind of how we do this at FOLAR, and how I've helped other organizations to do this. But the idea is that you're thinking about what are the qualifications that are required for this position. And you are asking yourself, does this person meet these qualifications? What sorts of qualifications, what are they, and do they meet them? And then what would meeting them actually mean? So you're going to take, for example, someone who has experience managing volunteers, right? This is a real life example from when we were hiring our events manager. Someone who has experience managing volunteers. A one for that person would be a person who has no experience managing volunteers, and a five would be a person who has 5 or more years managing volunteers. That's what I'm talking about, where you've got a question, a criteria, and then you're actually scoring the individual candidates for each question based upon on a scale of 1 to 5, or however you like to do your scale. 1 to 3, some people prefer 1 to 10, others prefer however you like to do your scale. And this takes some of the subjectivity out of the process. Either this person has it or they don't. Um, it's a really important process to create, and I could probably show. I'll find a way to send you all some of these so that you all can see how we've done it in the past. But the question, it's a question, it has the scale, and then there's a little line there that says a complete answer would include, right? This is what we're listening for. This is what we're hoping to hear. A complete answer would include. And that's a guideline to the scores on the hiring panel for what we're listening for. The rubric is kind of what those things are, and the scorecard is how many of those things how many of those boxes the person checks. Um, I'd also really highly advise to do some calibrating. Calibrating is really extremely important when it comes to this sort of thing, because what you think is a 5, someone else could think is a 3. And so having that conversation about how you score and how someone else scores, someone's a really tough score, someone else is a really easy score, can make a really big difference in these sorts of things too. I'm actually going to pull up one of our scorecards if you think that would be helpful. So I can show you all kind of what this looks like in real life.
That
And
would be amazing.
this will be for a position that we hired. Let's see.
You
Okay,
want me to stop sharing, or is it something that you'll put in the chat?
I can actually share this. This is actually going to be more illustrative than than me telling you this. It's show not tell. So if I can share my screen. Okay. Okay, so this is a scorecard that we used, a real one. I wasn't involved in this particular hire, but this is for our Director of Strategic Communications. And you can see we have a link to our hiring guidelines for everybody who's on the interview panel if they need a refresher. After that, we have interview bias information, which I can also share both of these documents with you all. We put the interviewer's name and the candidate's name. That happens at the top of the scorecard. And then we go into this. At the start of the call, we say to them, you should have received the questions for today's conversation. We ask all the candidates the same question. We'll get to that in a second. And we don't ask follow-up questions to ensure all candidates are considered equitably and to avoid bias. And so we encourage them to answer the question as fully as they can, because they're not going to get a follow-up question. This is not that coffee shop conversation that we like to do for interviews, or that we like to call interviews in this world. This is a very thoughtful process is designed to be as equitable as possible. But allow me to be perfectly candid here. This is not as fun. This is not nearly as fun as going to coffee and just shooting the breeze with somebody. It's not nearly as fun, and it can be a little bit awkward. So we say to people, if there's a pause between your response and the next question, don't let that throw you off. It just means we're taking notes, and we'll save time at the end for questions too. So you can see this. Jason is one of my staff members. He's my CDO, Chief Development Officer. Jason would be the supervisor for this particular position. And so this question was assigned to Jason. The next question was assigned to Kevin. But the question exists, right? And then a complete answer. What does a complete answer look like? What are we listening for when this person is answering this question? And then we're scoring this on a linear scale of 1 to 5. And then Kevin asks the question. We put notes, we have space for notes. If you just want to write, oh my gosh, I love that answer so much. As the interviewer, panel person, you get to just go off in this section. But then we go to the next person. The next person asks the question. We know what a complete answer is. We've already met about what complete answers are, what we're looking for. We've calibrated with one another as a hiring panel. We're scoring this person 1 to 5. If they answered unsatisfactorily or answered completely, we're putting in our notes, and that's what happens. And at the end of the day, this all goes into a spreadsheet because it's Google Forms, and we can see very clearly how the candidates matched up to one another, how they scored with one another. This is one way. There are so many beautiful ways to do this, but this is one way that we do this process at FOLAR. I'll pause for questions because I'm sure there's some at this point because that's a little much. That's a lot.
There's a question in the chat about, is it possible to have that available after the workshop as a resource? Would you be comfortable making a copy and sharing that out, or taking a screenshot so that we can refer back to kind of seeing the format?
I don't have a link. I mean, I have lots of link ones. I don't have one that I can send you a screenshot for sure. I can definitely share that out with
That'd be
everybody.
really helpful. Thank you, Candace.
Yeah, absolutely.
Candace, I noticed.
Yeah, go ahead, Linda.
Sorry, I noticed the scoring went to complete or not, but it didn't have a space for people that go above and beyond. And is that intentional, that either you've answered the question completely and that everyone that does that is what's measured, as opposed to someone who takes it to what might be considered a step higher, a step further?
That's a great question. I don't know if I know. I think that what we do for a 5 is if it's a complete answer, they get a 5. If it's a really complete answer, they still get a 5. But you will find in the notes people going, oh my gosh, that blew my mind. I was so impressed that they have this much experience in this area. And this scorecard does not protect you or save you from having to talk to each other at the end and having to kind of do a little negotiating. And I like this person because of this, but it gives you a place to start, and it keeps you from having the sorts of interviews where you just sit down and have coffee with somebody and you spend 20 minutes with this person because they remind you of someone you like, and 10 minutes with this person because you don't think they're a fit. So that's really kind of the point, but that's a great question. What if they're just above a 5? We give them a 5 in that case, and we will often write glowing notes in the little note section after each one.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm curious about like how much time do you dedicate before the interview to like go through all of the like calibration and the complete answer, and just kind of to have a sense of like, yeah, how much time you spend per position before the interviews.
Yeah, so we have to do it. We're busy. We're tired and busy. And just like the rest of you, we're environmental educators. And so we do a lot of this asynchronously. Someone will come up with questions. We'll have a document and like everybody put some questions in there. What do you think the question should be? What are we looking for? It's always mirroring the job listing. Sorry. It's not some out of left field question that has nothing to do with the role, right? It's mirroring the job listing. That's important. And we're having a conversation about like in the document, a shared Google Doc, everybody's putting questions. And then the person who's in charge of hiring, usually the supervisor of this person, will whittle it down and say, okay, y'all, I liked these questions, these 5 questions the best. I think these are the best questions. Let's meet and talk about what a complete answer would be and calibrate. So we'll have one meeting before we start interviewing folks because we don't have time for more than that. A lot of it happens in Google Docs and Slack. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, back to slides because I think there's some other things. Oh, there's some questions here. Let's see. In the chat, there's a question. How do you manage the questions at the end of the interview? Okay, we can talk about that too. My favorite part of the interview, I'll be honest, is when I say to the candidate or whoever's in charge of the interview, is there anything about you that you'd like to share with us that you didn't get a chance to talk about in the course of these questions? It's my favorite part. It's my favorite part because as beautifully thoughtful as I think my questions are, they're going to leave something out. and they're going to be driving in a particular direction, and people will surprise you. You know, I was sitting in with an organization I was helping, I was consulting, I was coaching their CEO, and they asked me to sit in on interviews for their COO. And they asked that question at the end. I'd asked them to. And this candidate just began to talk about how they had worked at this bank in Japan and had streamlined all of the practices of the banking system and how they'd learned so much and how they'd gotten all this wonderful like experience and information from a Japanese banking system. And we would have never asked a question where they could have shared that information with us. And so that's extremely important to give them that opportunity. But to answer your question, yes, there is an opportunity at the end of the interview where we ask them, do you have any questions for us? Just like every other interview in the world. We do let that be a little more of a conversation because this is their time to talk, their time to ask whatever they want. And that happens usually right after I ask my favorite question. Is there anything else you want us to know about your work or that you think would be helpful for us to understand? Because I want to acknowledge the drawback. Like, this is wonderful for making sure that you're not spending more time with some people than others, or asking lots of lovely, rich follow-up questions of certain people, but kind of just moving on to the next question for other people. This is great for that. What it's not so great for is really getting to know people's hearts and getting to know what drives them and what they care about. It's not as great for that. And we try really hard to encourage people in that first kind of initial conversation, like, be as effusive as you can in your answers. Share everything you want because we're not going to ask follow-up questions. So share as much as you like. You have lots of time. We usually carve out a good chunk of time so people feel like they can do that. They don't feel rushed, just so we have that. So that's how we handle questions at the end. Okay. Measure candidates against the rubric instead of an amorphous fit standards. I think we've talked about that enough. Looking at where people scored. What does this person score? How did this person score? That's how we make decisions. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. There have been times where we hired the person who had the second highest score. It doesn't mean just because the person has the highest score, you are automatically obligated by law to hire them. You still have to hire the people that you think are going to do the job well. But this keeps the interview process and the search process so much more even and level. And it's a little overkill. You can do a much simpler version of this, I think, sometimes, but this is how we like to do it. And this is how my clients all do it now. We do ask each candidate the exact same questions. This is another thing that when you just do a coffee chat, you may forget to ask certain people certain things, or you may ask more questions of someone else. We ask everyone the same questions. That ensures that everybody has the same chance to share their experience. We also level the playing field by sending questions in advance. And by that, this is the second most controversial boo hiss, oh my gosh, I can't believe you would do that thing on this list. And I want to talk a little bit about that. What that does is it allows people time. Oh, it allows people time to think about their answers. What I have heard in protest of this particular tip is, but what if people cheat? Dude, you're asking them questions about themselves. You're asking them questions about their experience. How do you cheat on that? This is so incredibly important for a couple of reasons. Number one, this idea that smart people answer questions fast, right? This does not allow this bias for fast answers does not allow for neurodivergency, does not allow for people who process differently, do not allow for people who think differently. It does not allow for that. And that can be a real problem. So that's the first thing. It is a myth that people who are smart or people who are on top of things are quick answerers. Some people are process people. And if you've ever been in a situation where someone asked you a question and you gave an example, and then later when you were driving home or later when you were in the shower, you go, oh, I should have said this example instead. That was so much a better story, or I could have really illustrated my point better in this way. That is why we send the questions in advance. It gives people an opportunity to think about what they want to share. I think that is so important. There is a lot of grumpiness about this amongst my clients when I bring this up because people want the gotcha question. They want people to be thinking quickly. I want people to be giving me their very best examples of who they are and the work that they've done. We've all done so many things. Think about a time when you had to let someone go. We've all had to do that as managers, right? Um, and you could probably think of some time right now as a manager that you had to let someone go. But what does that say about you? Think, what if you had a chance to think of the best example of a time you had to let someone go and the way you handled it and how you did it and why you did it and all of the things. Imagine if you had that kind of time, what a better story you could tell about yourself. This is not if your interview questions are, who was the Queen of Siam in what, then yes, people can cheat. Fine, fine. The 15th president of the United States. People can cheat. But that's not the kind of questions you should be answering in a job interview anyway. We're asking questions about people's experience, their experiences, and the ways in which they handle situations. Let's see, are there things in the chat? Okay, love it. Interview all candidates in the same space or using the same technology. In this day and age where people are coming from all over, we tend to do first round interviews, first round phone, second round Zoom, whether they live down the street or on the other side of the country, just because everybody gets the same experience. It is a very different thing to have somebody in the room with you than it is to have somebody on the screen. And it kind of makes it less fair for people who, A, don't live in the area or can't afford to take extra time off to be there for just an interview. The process of interviewing and the amount of time that it takes it can be really difficult for people of low income. The different hoops you ask people to jump through can be difficult for people of low income. And so being mindful of that and doing all interview candidates in the same space or using the same technology is really helpful. Same space is important too. They happen in the conference room. We're not going to take this person to lunch, but this person in the conference room. This is not how we're going to do this. So that's another consideration. Next one. Okay, so this is kind of advanced course in this sort of work, but this idea of two in the pool is something that is talked about a lot in the hiring world. It's outlined best, I think, in the Harvard Business Review, and I'll send a link to that for all of you as part of the little package you're getting at the end of this. But when there are at least two candidates from a minority group, whether that's women, people of color, people with disabilities, veterans, in the final pool of candidates, the chances of selecting one from that group significantly increases, comparing to only having one person from that group. So statistically, hiring a woman, if you have an organization and you would like to hire a woman or whatever, whether you want to or not, if there's only one woman in your final candidate pool, there's statistically no chance that person will be hired. It is statistically zero that person will be hired if there's only one. So what this ends up looking like in a lot of organizations is that we continue screening until we have two people from different groups. And that way we know that we at least have two in the pool from people who are LGBTQ plus or people who are women or people who are veterans, whatever it may be. Some people continue interviewing until there are at least two candidates in the final pool for the role. This is a little more complicated, and I have done it twice, and oh my goodness, it takes a long time sometimes. But that's just the way that the data around hiring looks. If you've only got one person, you only have one brown person in the pool at the end, there's a very, very small chance that person will be the one that is hired. That's just the way it is. Math. And last one, take some time to craft a thoughtful and inspiring equal opportunity employment statement. So many of them are like, we hire all kinds of people, thank you. Craft something that talks to and speaks to your values. What is important to your organization, why you do this, why you want to be inclusive and welcome lots of different people to work with you. that for some reason is a big study showed that's a big signifier to diverse candidates, whether or not they should spend their time seeking this role. So if it's just generic, it's just generic. But if you can make it less generic, do so. Get those values in there. Okay. That's my last slide. I'm happy to take some questions.
There was one
Um,
in the chat says, I may have missed this, but did you say how far in advance you send the questions? And it sounds like there's a number of people on this call as well who either have been on the potential employee side of this, as well as
yeah.
folks who have this as a practice. So it'd be wonderful to hear from you, and then perhaps others can use the chat or chime in.
Yes, I'd love to hear how long you all do or how long you've been given it. Mine is about 3 days. That's the sweet spot for me, about 3 days. Yeah. How about other people? You can come off mute. How long do you usually wait? How much time do you give?
I can chime in. I actually absolutely love the schedule send feature on email for this, and I
Oh,
can set them all up ahead of time, and I send it exactly 3 days ahead of every single interview so that it's also like everyone gets it exactly the same amount of time ahead. And I think I do 3 days as well. So
brilliant. Let's use technology.
yeah.
All right. That's a lot of stuff. And I really want to acknowledge that it's less fun and more awkward and takes so much more time than the coffee shop interview that we all love so much. But getting equity right has always taken more time than not. And so I hope that some of these will be valuable to you, will be helpful to you. I will send over the Avarna group. They updated that document recently. It's beautiful. And a few more resources that we're going to talk about at the end. I think that there was some more things that that the CPB Hub wanted to talk about before we wrap up.
Great. Yes. Okay, folks. My name is Leah Graniela Loving. I'm with Sembrando Lab. And before we share those resources, we have a few wonderful, we just actually have one little piece of conversation that we'd like to have with all of you. So can you add the slide? I believe there's a slide. We're going to do a quick, sorry, there's a dog on my lap. So just in case you hear somebody barking, it wasn't me. We're going to do a quick chatterfall. So, you know, as Candace shared in the beginning, we are in a new political time. We had a chance to talk a little bit about that. When we talked to our wonderful Cali community and our community-based partners and said, hey, you know, what kind of topics are interesting to you? What kind of webinars are interesting to you? We were in somewhat of a different world, dealing with very different situations. And what we want to make sure is that the webinars that we have and the webinars that we're offering are really answering your burning questions and are really supporting you where you're at. So what we're just going to do is we're going to do a quick chatterfall. And I'm wondering, Estrella, if you can put the slide on with the prompt. And we're going to take just a moment to think a little bit about what are the questions that we have right now? What are the webinars that would help us most right now, considering where we are, considering the political moment that we're in? How do we need to come together? What topics would be the most fruitful for us? So I believe there is a slide there, and we're going to do this in a chatterfall. Should be a slide with a green background. Here we go. All right. So folks, it's going to take just a few minutes. And based on the moment we're in, what other webinar topics would be the most helpful? So what we're going to do is we're going to take about 2 minutes to type your answer in the chat, 2-3 minutes. And when you have done so, just give an analog or a digital thumbs up and let us know. Do not press enter. Okay, so you're going to type your answer in the chat. Do not press enter. When I say so, everybody's going to press enter. Our chat box is going to be flooded with beautiful questions and topics that we might want to discuss in webinars in the next few months. Yeah, does anyone have any questions? Anything coming up? I can't see hands. I got to put everybody on an everybody view. But yeah, it looks good. Okay, folks, so what we're going to do is going to just take about 2 minutes. Based on the moment we're in, what other webinar topics would be the most helpful? And we're talking about this spring. So please enter your ideas into the chat box and let me know. Give me a thumbs up when when you have done so. Thanks, folks. Great, and okay, I'm seeing some analog thumbs. All right, waiting for a few digital thumbs. I want to make sure that everyone has had a chance to respond before we press enter. So, oh, my first digital thumb. Thank you, Rachel. Any other digital thumbs coming my way? Maybe just another 30 seconds to finish up. All right, that looks good. Looking good. All right, friends. I feel like I should have put on some elevator music, but I don't have any right now, and I don't think you all want to hear me sing. So let's just go ahead and press enter, and we'll see what comes up in the chat. Go forth. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Okay. Oh, here we go. So I'm looking at discussion on educational qualifications, degree or life experience, leaning into our social emotional learning sphere more, especially during this new era, undocumented communities and supporting them, not reinventing the wheel, integrating traditional knowledge into modern environmental ed, navigating new federal funding, landscape. Yes, I've been hearing that too. Climate change and how our program areas are being affected, rapid movement of programs, relocating, rescheduling, strategic planning. Yes, board engagement, recruitment, resource sharing, coming together to fill holes. How do we best support our communities? For example, immigrants who are targeted, LGBTQ who are targeted by these new policies, supporting our staff who are being targeted, supporting adults and students who are facing challenges, neurodivergence in the workplace, things to consider to maintain our site as a safe space and supportive resources for what to do on our field trips. Thank you, everybody. I would just like a few folks to just unmute and share if there's anything that's really standing out to you here. What patterns are you noticing? What topics? Maybe it's something you entered into the chat, or maybe it's something you didn't and you see there that are just really kind of, juicy for you.
I'm seeing safety. Safety's coming up a lot as a theme.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. Safety, creating those safe spaces, especially for both staff and our students, right? Who are targeted at this moment. Yeah, anything else that feels juicy? And feel free if you don't feel like unmuting, because there's 17 of us here, it's fair. Feel free to use emojis to, put thumbs up next to the topics that really resonate for you most. So a variety of ways to kind of engage and yeah, on the topics that feel like they give you the most life. So anything else that's coming up for folks? And of course, my dog is blowing fur into the world and there's hair in my mouth now, but okay, thank you. Any last words? Any last words? Thank you so much. I'm seeing some thumbs up. This is really important. Thank you. That's helpful on supporting staff whose identities are being targeted in the current political landscape and with interactions with the public while working. Great.
Candace, I had another question for you.
Yeah.
On the area having to do with employee retention,
Mhm.
with the different organizations that you've worked with who have embarked on some of these processes that you're recommending for equitable hiring,
Mhm.
do we have any kind of statistical information or data that demonstrates that when you utilize these hiring practices, the long-term retention of those employees is affected by that? Do they stay longer because you ended up hiring the right person versus someone who maybe didn't feel welcome or included and departed from the organization sooner than they may have wanted to? So just on the retention side.
Yeah, I think that this is about half the battle of retention. I apologize, I've got a cough drop in my mouth. This is about half the battle of retention. What I have found really makes a difference in retention is an inclusive workspace. And an intentionally inclusive workplace requires a whole different set of activities, practices, values, and strategies that I'm happy we can get together again and talk about how to develop an inclusive workplace. This is half of it, yes. Hiring the right people, taking the time, showing people your values, helping people understand what's important to your organization, very important. But in talking about inclusion, the number one indicator of an inclusive environment is employee engagement. And that's like, I can do 3 hours on employee engagement. So that's a kind of an additional conversation. Yeah. Okay, we have a vote for inclusive workspace.
I was just going to say there's some interest in that topic. So that's a great one to elevate as well as a continuation.
Great.
Thank you. Well, I know you've mentioned several resources and want to make sure that we call out some of them. Did you want to speak to some of these? And I added that one on the end, and I'm going to take a little bit of time just to share that out as well. But I want to hear from you first.
Yes, I can. This is a great, these have links, so I don't know what the sharing situation is for post workshop, but if you all could make sure folks get this. The DEI Toolkit, Mitigating Bias in Hiring. This is my Bible for this work from the Avarna Group. They also recently did this beautiful webinar called Navigating the DEI Backlash. It's wonderful. Please watch it. It's so good. If you go to their website, there's a link to the Vimeo of it. And then the other thing that the Avarna Group is doing that I love is office hours. If you need to spend some time with an expert in equity, talking about what's going on, they have set aside office hours that you can book them, and they're not charging for them. It's wonderful. I would check in. I don't know how widely available or for how long they're going to be doing this, but excuse me, it's a great resource. I'm taking this cough drop off before I choke. Okay, and then Gender Decoder is another tool I love. You can take your job listing, copy and paste it there, and run it through, and it will let you know whether or not your job listing is reading and leaning more masculine or feminine. A lot of people like to put words like tackle or team or things like that that can be a little more masculine leaning. And so it just makes you more aware so that you can make decisions about that. And then I mentioned too in the pool that there are lots of places you can read about this concept. My favorite resource is the Harvard Business Review, and they've got a great article on it. So that's the link there. And then I can also send to the organizers a screenshot or at least some information about how we build our rubric and scorecards at FOLAR so that you all can see those if that would be helpful. That's it.
Thank you, Candace. That would be tremendously helpful. And thank you for these. There's a lot here to digest from what you've shared today, as well as these links. So tons of great resources. I do want to throw one more into the mix, and that is the EE guidance for equitable pay and hiring that we put together. This was a project that was actually spearheaded by the Southeastern Alliance for Environmental Education. So our friends on the other end, on the other side of the country, who were looking at national data around equitable pay and hiring. And, much of what they were finding really reflects what we heard from Candace today. And so I just want to give a quick kind of outline of what this resource offers. And I'll just run through, what we did was, with their permission, we took their guidance and then incorporated data that we collected from California, from providers here around what we're seeing in terms of representation, so BIPOC and LGBTQ plus in particular, communities, as well as specifically looking at pay. And so I really appreciate all of the conversation that we're having around hiring and kind of thinking about how we can adjust our hiring processes And I think that we also can't talk about hiring without looking at pay and looking at compensation. And you commented on benefits and really being transparent about those benefits, both the tangible as well as the intangible. Really thinking about opportunities like having a flexible work schedule, where you can work from home or you can flex your hours, some of those things that can make a real difference if somebody has dependents or has, different kinds of needs. So I just wanted to call this out as another place to go to take a look. And so this is pulling primarily from kind of national data to understand, what does this look like across our country, with some components that are California specific. So you'll see it's a 34-page document, so it's a little lengthy, but if there's a particular area that you're working on, there's some, resources that you could jump down to that section and focus on it. And then I'll pop up. One thing I really heard from you, Candace, was kind of thinking about what are some steps? Maybe we can't do everything all at once, but thinking about where's our target? What is kind of the North Star that we're going to? And what is the very minimum we should be doing? Obviously, we want to be striving for more than the minimum. But it can be helpful also to see, if you're on a really small team, like, okay, where do you want to start? Where are some of the specific areas that you can grow in? And so, I just screenshotted some of the sections at the very end of the guidance document to give you a sense of, additional deep dives that you can go. These are all live links here to get more information, and kind of thinking about, where you want to be able to prioritize your efforts, and, how you can grow. How do we move towards some of these target standards? So within each of those buckets that you saw on that first page in the table of contents, there are some of these guidelines. If you want to just kind of go right to the standards, that some people like to do, and a lot there that we think might be of use. So we'll share that link out as well for folks. I'll put it in the chat too, if that's something that you think might help you in your organization. So we are coming to our end here. I think we could probably spend all night on this topic and then some. It's been really, really beneficial, juicy comments in the chat. I think this is really resonating with this community, and just so appreciate the thought and time that you put into it, Candace, despite not feeling your best. So thank you for showing up and being here in community with us. And I want to put some big thanks to the folks on the program leader webinar team, who many of whom are on here today, who thought about this as a topic and really wanted it to come, to our full community. So appreciate everybody for doing that planning. There's a couple of announcements I want to share from Yoey and Callie as well. Other opportunities to engage like this or in other ways, sometimes even in real life. So this is the first one, which is that we do have registration open for the statewide conference coming up in May. We'll be in Marin County. And this can be a great opportunity to send your staff, but also to come as a program leader to meet with other program leaders. Some of us here on the call, I know, will be there. We'll have a breakout session for program leaders, and it's just another wonderful place to connect with each other, be able to share resources, best practices, and be in a positive learning community. So please do think about joining us for this event. Oops. We also have 2 impact awards right now. Nominations are open for Lifetime Achievement as well as Organization of the Year. And the Organization of the Year is an award that we partner on with Callie to really spotlight providers like yourselves who are doing incredible work in your communities. And so please consider celebrating either an individual or an organization that you think is really going above and beyond. The organization that Candace represents, FOLAR, that she talked a little bit, they are one of our organizations of the year that we've celebrated, and really appreciate for the incredible work they're doing, in particular around connecting with their communities and advancing equity and inclusion, in the LA region. So we'd really love to see some wonderful nominations coming through and help us to celebrate the exemplary work that's happening around the state. Another aspect of thinking about, equity and inclusion within our work is certainly looking at our programming. And so I want to offer this as one opportunity, and that is the Universal Design for Learning and Environmental Education course that we offer at AEOE. It's something where we're really looking at how do we make our programming more accessible, in particular to a wide range of learners. So thinking about, we talked about like neurodivergent staff or folks with disabilities. This is focusing much more on the participants itself. So really looking at the programming, but an important part of the conversation of inclusion, you know, thinking about how can you intentionally design a program so that no matter who shows up in your program, they can thrive, they can have an amazing experience. So this is one way to get some additional learning yourself or for one of your colleagues. And then with that, we just really want to thank you for taking the time to be together in community, and just going back to the original conversation that we kicked things off with here. We know it's been rough. 2025 has been really challenging on a lot of different levels, and the work that you're doing is so critical. It's so important for our world, for our planet, for our communities, and we so admire the work that you do and are so grateful for you wanting to learn and wanting to connect and be here with us. So we hope you have a beautiful evening. We hope to see you at a future webinar. We are working on pulling some together. We expect to have a couple more this spring, and we'll be announcing those soon. Now that we have some great feedback from all of you, we can finalize our topics, and you'll be getting some follow-up emails from Celeste in the next week or so with the recording and the slides and all of these links here that we shared. So big thanks to Candace, and have a great night, everyone.